My adult years have been sort of a shit show, so there have really only been brief moments in the 17-ish years since I've been out of high school that I've been able to follow my dreams or passions or whatever the fuck you want to call it. For a brief shining moment, I found myself working on sets as a set costumer. This was pretty exciting for me because I'd always had big aspirations of being a screenwriter, so being on set in any capacity was amazing. Between 2017 and 2019, I worked on some truly horrible, strange, odd, and inexplicable independent films. One of my last gigs on set was a movie called The Haunting of Sharon Tate, starring Hilary Duff. If you aren't familiar with Sharon Tate, she was a famous actress that was brutally murdered by the Manson family. This version retelling the murders were egregiously sensationalized and frankly contained claims that were simply untrue. One morning after an all-night shoot, I came home feeling deeply unsettled. We had shot all of the murders that night. Referencing back to real crime scene photographs to correctly apply the blood to the actors and listening to the actors wailing, portraying the violent and very real deaths of very real people had left me feeling like sick to my stomach. Cards on the table, I did not quit the job after that night of work. I needed the money, for better or for worse, and I'm even still up in the air about how much good this did. After we wrapped the film, I asked the producers to take my name off the credits. Now, long before I ever worked on that movie about Sharon Tate and the Manson family murders, I had an interest in true crime. I never really found the hugely sensationalized true crime podcasts and series to be my favorite. My true crime journey probably started with Serial, which I think was a jumping off point for a lot of people in the 2010s. And I definitely went through a period where I would consume just whatever true crime I could get my hands on. Though I quickly learned that I preferred the more investigative journalism type true crime podcasts as opposed to storytellers kind of just storytelling stories that aren't theirs. And not because there was anything inherently wrong with that. It just wasn't really my vibe. Now, while this video isn't inherently about true crime, it is about disturbing true events made into sensationalized exploitative entertainment. To be clear, I'm not talking about documentaries, docuseries, true crime podcasts, or anything that focuses solely on the facts. Though I do acknowledge that that genre of entertainment can be exploitative, we're going to focus on a different genre. Plenty of movies slap the based on a true story or based on true events label in an attempt, I'm assuming, to pique the interest of viewers. I personally don't need that kind of label on my films or my entertainment in general, unless what I'm about to watch is basically verbatim the events that happened. If a movie's being made like Hotel Rwanda, placing a based on a true story and based on a true events label on it seems totally appropriate. People who lived through the tragic and heinous genocide in Rwanda actually helped the producers and writers stay true to the actual story. And while I'm absolutely positive that there are points of views that can acknowledge exploitation in a film like this, it is presented more like a piece of fictionalized media used as an educational tool to shed light on an event that not a lot of people had ever even heard of, even though it had only happened in 1994. For me, that's the main difference between a film like Hotel Rwanda or 2017's 9/11. In Hotel Rwanda, there's very little entertainment. I don't remember rooting for anything in that movie except for people to fucking survive. It is an absolute trek to get through, and by the end, I was absolutely sick to my stomach. Granted, I saw it in theaters, and I was like 12 years old, so bit of a miss on my mom's part. But I've rewatched it as an adult, and it's still just as much of a trek, and it's still just as horrifying, and entertaining is not quite the word that I would use to label it. 9/11, on the other hand, is a fictional story filled with fictional people doing fictional things set in the Twin Towers as the 9/11 attacks unfolded. Why exactly do I find something like this egregious? Let's fucking talk about it. I will never minimize the horror tragedy of what happened on September 11th, 2001. I was 11 when the towers fell, and it was a fundamental experience for me as a millennial, as I think it was for a lot of us millennials who were old enough to remember and comprehend the footage that we were seeing. I do not believe there was a need for a fictionalized human interest story 16 years after the tragedy, starring Charlie Sheen, a noted 9/11 truther. I'm sure there are people who actually survived the horrors, and I know there are people who have done this who would be interested in sharing their stories with writers, producers, whatever. Not that they owe us those stories. Nobody needs to share their trauma with the world. But if a survivor doesn't want to share their story, they shouldn't have to. Nor should they have to watch a shitty movie created to what? Re-traumatize a nation over a decade later? Next, let's make a Romeo and Juliet style love story set at Columbine. For fuck's sake. Now, I would say that the place in media that I see the based on a true story bullshit the most is true crime retellings and, unfortunately, the horror genre. This isn't always a problem, though personally, I don't think the label based on a true story is needed to pique people's interest in a horror movie. And if you do need that label, letting you know that the murders you're about to witness are based on real murders, may I interest you in some therapy? Instances where it's just used to get people interested in the movie, the show, the film, whatever, I don't love, but I'm not going to rage about it. The Strangers has a based on label, and the story they're claiming it's based on is the Manson murders. And as somebody who worked on a highly offensive retelling of part of the Manson murders, I gotta say, The Strangers is just a home invasion movie that the studio wanted to make seem a little spicier. So while I think it's stupid to slap that label on a movie like The Strangers, I'm not gonna rage about it. It's not a hill I'm willing to die on. I can't even begin to discuss franchises like The Conjuring and people like the Warrens. That shit's gonna need its own entire deep dive because, well, just as a taste, I think the Warrens are con artists and the scum of the earth. Moving on. Possibly the first really famous crime to be made into an exploitative, sensationalized piece of fiction would have to be the Amityville Horror. If you're not familiar with the actual case, here's a quick rundown. In November 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr., and I apologize if I'm saying that last name wrong, killed his mother, father, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters in their family home. DeFeo Jr.'s recollections of the night, the order of events, as well as who could have been the killer besides him, have changed, shifted, and altogether he was deemed an unreliable source years ago. Now, after the killings, the Lutz family moves into the house. And I mean just after the killings, 13 months, in fact. And it's told to them, it is disclosed to them that an entire family was murdered in this house. They discuss it and they're like, you know what? It's chill. We're going to move in. They moved in and then they promptly moved out 28 days later, claiming that they had been experiencing paranormal activity, hauntings, demonic possession, the whole 9 yards. Oddly, at least to me, a book about the hauntings was almost immediately published, not by the Lutzes, and then a movie adaptation followed in 1979, only 5 years after the original murders. Since the making of the first Amityville horror film, there have been over 24 other films using the Amityville name. And so many of them look bad. Anyways. Now, I'm not sure about the motives of the Lutzes, but do I think it's fucking weird to move into a house that a mass murder occurred in, like, just a year ago, only live in it for 28 days, move out, sell your recollections to a writer so that they can write a book about it? Seems a little bit weird. Seems a little bit suspect. But what do I know? Maybe green slime really did come out of the walls. Now, the Lutz's motives isn't really the point. The point is that producers, filmmakers, and writers jumped at an opportunity to tell a sensationalized, demonized story about a real murder that had occurred. It was a tragedy. There had never been any real evidence of a haunting or supernatural activity, but writers jumped at the opportunity to write their version of it instead of just, I don't know, writing something fucking original. They had to take a real, true event and turn it into a sensationalized, mediocre piece of entertainment. Sidebar, I'm not talking about the first Amityville horror movie. I know that as horror fans, that's like a classic. And as a film, it's good. As a retelling of someone's real life horror, it's horrible. As writers, we get our ideas from all around us. I'm not denying that. I constantly lift from experiences, feelings, things that have inspired me. But I just think it's a hack job if you can't take inspiration from a true story and twist it and contort it to tell something new and not traumatize, re-traumatize, or exploit victims. While Amityville is possibly the first and most famous example of a true crime story being made into sensationalized fiction, it is far from the only one. I would be willing to argue that the birth of streaming, the popularity of binge watching, and the trend of many viewers not really even watching the unentertaining parts of their media led to places like Netflix and Hulu paving the way for a hefty amount of fictionalized true crime content. I am not going to sit here and say that sensationalized true crime, dramatizations of true crime can't be entertaining. They can be. My question is, should they be? A perfect example of this would be the Hulu series The Act. The Act was based off of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother Dee Dee Blanchard. And again, while this isn't a true crime channel, I am going to give you a quick rundown of the crime just so that you can get on board with what's happening. Essentially, Dee Dee Blanchard made Gypsy Rose think that she was very ill, sick, possibly even dying while she was growing up. As if that's not enough of a tragedy, eventually Gypsy Rose convinces her online boyfriend to kill her mother. Gypsy Rose Blanchard did her time, and there are 1,000,001 documentaries about the true events of what actually happened. That's not totally true. There's actually like one, but it's better and less exploitative than the show The Act. It's called Mommy Dead and Dearest, if you're interested in checking it out. The Hulu show The Act came out way after the aforementioned documentary about the Gypsy Rose case and aired while Gypsy Rose was still in prison. I have seen both, and The Act does not cover anything that the documentary doesn't. In fact, The Act shows depictions of a really real girl being psychologically and sometimes physically tortured by her mother. While most of the documentary tells you things intertwined with footage and interviews, the show The Act shows you everything, because otherwise it's not really entertaining, right? Whether everything they show on The Act is true or not, a lot of it is absolutely heartbreaking. One of the most disturbing moments of the show for me is when Joey King, who plays Gypsy Rose, begs her mother to let her keep her teeth after her mother basically tells her that for medical reasons she has to have all her teeth extracted, which was a lie. Does Joey King do a good job? I guess. Did I need to see a fictionalized depiction of a real victim begging their mother to stop medically torturing them? No. You're probably thinking, Sailor, then why did you watch it? Well, because it came out 7 years ago and I was an asshole. Another true crime story that has been turned into a sensationalized series is about the woman Pam Hupp's involvement in her best friend's murder. The show is called The Thing About Pam. And watching the trailer was enough. I did not need to watch more than the trailer. While I already didn't appreciate that Renee Zellweger dons a fat suit to play the main role in this, and frankly, the prosthetics on her face are like bad, like really bad. Like if you're gonna go out of your way to not cast a fat actor to play a fat person, like can we get a good makeup artist? Because it's kind of egregious. My main grievance with this particular show is that it was toned as a dark comedy.
He's a pillar of the community.
Thanks, Jer. Great guy.
What? It's a real story about a real murder, and the writers decided to give it the kiss kiss bang bang treatment?
Look up idiot in the dictionary. You know what you'll find?
Picture me?
No! The definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are.
Also, the clips I've seen of it, like, it's bad.
All Pam's rise. Court is now in session.
It's just bad. And as I always say, if you're going to make a piece of offensive media, it needs to at least be entertaining. At the very least. There are literally entire Reddit threads dedicated to talking about how people have tried to watch this show and they were disturbed by the tone of it and the fact that it was depicting a real life true crime story, but was like kind of like dark comedy tongue in cheek. It's weird. It's wrong and weird and just... Now, this next example is one I completely understand not everyone's going to agree with belongs in this video, but it's something that I've been thinking about for literal years. In 2014, two 12-year-old girls lured their third friend into the woods and stabbed her 19 times in order to, quote, sacrifice her to the internet phenomenon Slender Man. The young victim somehow survived and was rescued by a passerby. The two girls who carried out the attack were tried as adults and ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity, both placed in mental health institutions. There isn't a bit of this tragedy that doesn't haunt me. I will never stop wondering if all 3 of those girls could have been spared a lifetime of trauma if mental health care wasn't just more accessible in this country, and if there wasn't so much stigma surrounding asking for help when your child is suffering openly from mental health problems. My heart absolutely breaks for the girl who was assaulted and will inevitably have lifelong PTSD. It also breaks for the 2 girls who carried out the attack, who were visibly suffering from severe mental health problems, which both sets of parents admit to, and nobody did anything about it. 3 young lives ruined when, if somebody had intervened, maybe none of them had to be. Only 2 years later, a fictional Slender Man movie was put into production. 2 years after that, in 2018, it was released in theaters nationwide. Now, unlike a show like The Act, the Slender Man movie, which ironically also stars Joey King, isn't a dramatization of the events of the attempted murder. It does have a fully fictionalized story with fully fictionalized characters. And those fictionalized characters get driven mad by the entity of Slender Man. Now, while some people may argue, and rightfully so, that this does not count as a true event being made into exploitative entertainment, I have to disagree. The event already had a very detailed, well-made documentary in HBO's Beware the Slender Man. That documentary was released in 2016 and got a good amount of attention. It seems unlikely to me, even though the filmmakers swear that this isn't the case, that they weren't aware of the popularity of the documentary and the true crime case and weren't trying to piggyback off of the success of it. But of course, we can't know that for sure. It also seems egregious to me that anyone would greenlight a movie featuring Slender Man, a group of teens, and supernatural possession a mere 4 years after the real-life tragedy. Frankly, I don't care that it's not supposed to be a sensationalized retelling of the actual true crime. I think it hits way too close to home, and it was egregious to make the film so close to the true events. I also just don't for 1 second believe that it wasn't inspired by the actual attacks, and that's just crap. Also, if you wanted to make a creepypasta movie, there's like 8 bajillion creepypastas. Like, seriously, there are so many creepypastas. Like, write a better story, y'all. Now let's talk about possibly the most insane and strange case of sensationalized true crime for media entertainment that I've personally ever come across. Quick story time. In 2010/2011-ish, my friend invited me to a movie promotional event. I wasn't interested in seeing the movie, but the event seemed pretty cool. It was Aziz Ansari and Jesse Eisenberg serving pizza at a cute little local pizza parlor in San Francisco for exactly 30 minutes. And they were promoting their film 30 Minutes or Less, where Jesse Eisenberg plays a pizza delivery driver that gets kidnapped, placed in a bomb vest, and made to rob a bank, or the vest is going to go off. It seemed like a fine plot for a stupid comedy. Like, I wasn't super interested in it, but whatever, fun, stupid, silly. The problem is, in 2003, something almost identical happened. Long story short, the pizza delivery man that had a bomb strapped to him, well, it detonated and he blew up and died. The makers of 30 Minutes or Less swear they had no prior knowledge of this true crime, which, for anyone wondering, was later made into a Netflix docuseries called Evil Genius. I don't believe for a second that they were not aware. It's billed as one of the most bizarre crimes in history. Investigators were stunned. It was all over the news. I cannot imagine, like, a quick Google search and like the pizza delivery bomber like would have come up. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and call bullshit. Like, because really, you just came up with a concept on your own that's that close to an actual event that happened? And it's not even sensationalized drama. You made a bad comedy. What? What? No. There are so many pieces of media that follow this trend of sensationalizing tragedy and trauma. These are just a few of the ones that I found most egregious over the years. I don't think it does anyone good to try to dictate what someone should or shouldn't consume media-wise. So this piece is not about trying to convince you to not watch certain types of media. But I do think it's important to acknowledge where our entertainment comes from and if it's built off a foundation of someone's real life suffering. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with taking inspiration from the world. Like I said earlier in this video, writers, creators, we do it all the time. I do it all the time. It is completely reasonable to write or tell stories about the world around you and the things that move or disturb you. My problem is when creators and writers take someone's tragedy and trauma verbatim, change a couple names, put people in a different city, maybe add a based on a true story disclaimer, and then call it a day. Or when we create a piece of sensationalized fiction that's just set in the midst of tragedy. Not only do I think it's disrespectful to victims and survivors of whatever the event is, it denotes, honestly, a lack of creativity. So many dramatizations of true events come out of these streaming services, and I just have to know, like, is there just no creativity, like, flowing over there, or what? Like, must we tell people's true life tragedies as dramatizations for entertainment? Or could we just hire fresh writers and people with fresh ideas so we don't need to monetize human suffering? I don't know. I'm just spitballing. You know, I'm just wondering, is it really that hard to write something original? Do we need over 24 Amityville horror movies? I don't think so. In the end, my point isn't to dictate what people should and shouldn't watch, but perhaps we can all consume that media with a little bit more intellect and a little bit more thoughtfulness, and possibly a little bit more self-awareness about what we find entertaining and why. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel for more.